Welcome to episode 506 of the Brainy Business, Understanding the Psychology of Why People Buy. In today's episode, we're talking about optimism bias, how it shapes our beliefs, behaviors, and decisions for better or for worse. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. Have you ever been so hopeful about something, a relationship, a project, a big decision, that you found yourself brushing aside red flags because it just felt like it was going to work out? That's optimism bias at work. Today's episode is a refreshed replay of one of the earliest Behavioral Economics Foundation's episodes here on the podcast, which originally came out in early 2019. We're talking about optimism bias, that wonderfully sneaky little cognitive shortcut that makes us believe our odds are better than they really are. Whether it's thinking we'll win the lottery, beat startup failure rates, or finally finish our giant to-do list today, even though we never do. It shows up everywhere. And here's the thing. Optimism bias can be amazing. It gives us hope. It gets us to start the business, take the leap, say yes when others wouldn't. But it also has a dark side, especially when it leads us to ignore warning signs or skip planning for the real work involved. I chose to bring this one back now because it's the perfect setup for the next brand new episode, my conversation with Abby Davison, co-author of Money and Love. That book is all about making life's biggest decisions with both your head and your heart. And before you can really do that well, you need to understand the role optimism bias might be playing behind the scenes. Because when it comes to love, money, new jobs, and big moves, most of us are incredibly optimistic, sometimes to our own detriment. We assume things will work out, we'll beat the odds, or that any issue will resolve itself with time. And while optimism can absolutely be a good thing, it needs to be checked with reality to support better outcomes. This episode will help you understand how optimism bias shows up for yourself and at work, how it influences decisions, and what you can do to spot it for yourself and your teams. Really quickly, before we get into the conversation, I want to be sure you know there are links in the show notes for my top related past episodes and books, ways to get in touch, and more. It's all within the app you're listening to and at thebrainybusiness.com/506. Now let's jump right in and talk about optimism bias. This is one of those topics that has a name that makes it seem like you might know what it is, but you potentially don't know for sure. And you probably don't realize how much it impacts you and your customers every day. So, what is optimism bias? Essentially, this is our tendency to overweight the likelihood good things will happen to us and underestimate the likelihood bad things will happen to us. You may remember in episode 30 on economic booms and busts, when I mentioned that even when we're told a statistic like 1 in 3 people are at risk of developing cancer, our optimism bias tells us it's not going to be us or anyone we love. It's 1 in 3 of those people over there, not us. On the flip side, we may say that winning the lottery is a 1 in a million shot, but we still think we have a pretty good chance of winning. In reality, the odds of winning the lottery's grand prize is 1 in 292,201,338, which are pretty darn terrible odds. But do you still feel like you have a decent shot of winning if you buy a ticket? Probably. And that's because of, again, your optimism bias. It's important to note that optimism bias is not the same as being an optimist. And if you consider yourself to be a pessimist or a realist, it doesn't mean that you are not impacted by the optimism bias. It just might impact you a little bit differently. But I would be willing to bet there is at least one place where each of us has made a decision based on optimism bias at some point in our lives. A great example of this is marriage. Most everyone has probably heard the statistic that about half of marriages end in divorce. Some say it's as low as a third, but there's still a decent chance that 2 out of every 5 people will get divorced. If you're married, do you think you will be one of those 2? Probably not. On their wedding days, what percentage of newlyweds do you think say they believe their marriages will end in divorce? That's right. 0. Everyone thinks it's going to work out. They will be the ones to make it. Even divorce lawyers and people who've been married multiple times say it will not be them, not this time. And this, again, is because of our optimism bias. What about, say, heart disease? According to the CDC, 1 in every 4 deaths is due to heart disease, claiming 610,000 lives each year. When I said that statistic, what did you think about yourself? Did you really think you would be one of the 4? Will your spouse be one of the 4? Anyone in your immediate family? Your close friends? No, you probably assumed it would not be you or those closest to you. It'll be that guy over there, someone far from me, because we will do and be better. We also think our children are uniquely talented, attractive, and skilled, that they will grow up to change the world and do amazing things. They will get academic and athletic scholarships to the top schools and do better than we have done for ourselves, which is pretty impressive because we're optimistic we will do some really great things by the time those kids go off to college, right? In fact, 75% of people say they are optimistic about the future for their own family. But when asked about the general population, only 30% think the future is bright for families in general, or that people are better off than a few generations ago. Does something seem off here? Of course it does. And as Tali Sharot said in her great TED Talk on optimism bias, which I've linked to in the show notes, this is really important. We are optimistic about ourselves. We're optimistic about our kids. We're optimistic about our families, but we're not so optimistic about the guy sitting next to us. And we're somewhat pessimistic about the fate of our fellow citizens and the fate of our country. And this is our optimism bias at work. One other important clarification is that this is not a rainbow unicorn sort of fantasy land people are living in. In general, we do not sit on the couch and think that everything is going to turn out amazing and we'll win the lottery even if we don't buy a ticket. Instead, optimism bias means that deep down, ingrained in our DNA, we believe that we have a unique ability to do better and be better than everyone else. If we try, when we try, we will have a better outcome than others. We'll beat the odds, and we are uniquely gifted in this world. Let's play a little game to show how this works. I want you to think about yourself and how you rank compared to the general population. When I give these examples, think about whether you would rate yourself in the bottom half. Are you average compared to everyone else? Are you in the top 25%? Consider that for each of these. Okay, are you ready? Your ability to get along with others. Would you say you're in the bottom 25%, average, top 25%? How about driving ability, honesty, trustworthiness, sense of humor, compassion or understanding, attractiveness, modesty? Did you say you were in the top 25% for most of those abilities, or was it sort of your first inclination? Well, guess what? So did everybody else. Most people will rank themselves in the top quarter of the population on abilities and characteristics such as these. The problem, of course, is we can't all be in the top 25%. This made me think of that great scene from When Harry Met Sally. You know, the one with the wagon wheel coffee table? I've linked to a quick little snippet of it in the show notes in case you aren't familiar or just want to laugh because it's great. Carrie Fisher is moving in with her boyfriend, and he wants this horrible wagon wheel coffee table. So they ask the friends, Harry and Sally, to vote. He argues that he has good taste, to which she says, everyone thinks they have good taste and a sense of humor, but they couldn't possibly all have good taste, which is true, and the way optimism bias works in a nutshell. But Billy Crystal's character, Harry, goes on to explain how they'll be fighting over all these items later on, even though they're happy now. He goes on a bit of a tirade about how an $8 dish will cost them $1,000 in legal fees and begs them to put their names in their books now for his sake. And that, believe it or not, years from now, they will be fighting over this stupid Roy Rogers wagon wheel coffee table. And of course, the best line in the whole thing is when Carrie Fisher assures her boyfriend, I want you to know I will never want that wagon wheel coffee table. Oh, it's a great movie. I think I'm going to have to go watch it again soon. Anyway, this is optimism bias, both sides. The believing that you have good taste, as well as believing that you're going to be the ones that make it, that you won't be dividing up your books and fighting over a wagon wheel coffee table 5, 10, 15 years from now. That you're going to do better than the odds, even when you don't have any real justification to feel that way, and might actually have some reasons to think you would be more likely to be in the negative column. So what does that all mean for you and your business? How does this impact you and your current or potential customers? When this topic had so many votes on social media, I reached out to several of the individuals who chose it as their number one request to see what they were hoping to learn about, because I felt some pressure to make sure I really covered everything. And here are some of the responses I got, which I'm going to go into detail on in the episode. One person said, I'd be interested in examples of the over-under and how it applies to business, how we can check ourselves. Another said, does optimism bias mean we're naive, or does it mean we look for the silver lining? Another's interested in optimism versus pessimism and what makes a better leader, how to factor this into goal setting, and how it affects behavior change messaging. Another said, I'd like to see how it affects the decisions our prospective clients make, and saying things like, oh, I can do that myself, or that problem will never happen to me, and how we can overcome those items to get more clients. If you have those same questions, great, because I'm going to answer them and break them all down for you now. The first question is about the over-under. The TED Talk I've linked to says about 80% of us are impacted by optimism bias. My guess is that's an understatement. And as I said earlier in the episode, I think everyone has experienced some form of optimism bias at some point in their lives, or they will. There are just too many scenarios where it comes into play. A situation like being in a good mood can impact optimism bias, and it would be something that might not come up in a study. Some people are going to experience it more than others, but we all have likely used this rule of thumb at least once. For all the entrepreneurs listening, we are likely to be the serious optimism biasers of the world. We believe we can launch or create something no one ever has, change the world with our businesses, beat the odds. And this is a good thing for everyone, not just entrepreneurs. Some people claim you should have low expectations in life so you won't be disappointed if you don't achieve things. But Margaret Marshall and John Brown, both from my home state of Washington, did a study to test the low expectations theory and essentially proved it wrong. They found that people with high expectations are happier than those with low expectations. And it all ties back to the way the event is interpreted. And this applies whether it's acing a test in school or losing a big client. Here's how the two groups react differently. When someone with high expectations or an optimism bias succeeds, they tie that back to their own abilities and traits. I am smart and I worked hard, which is why I got an A on the test, and I will get more and more A's in the future. What about when someone with high expectations fails a test? Do they think it's because they're stupid? Has their entire view been shattered? Of course not. They think something like, the test had some bad questions on it. I'll do better on the next one because I'm smart. So what happens for the low expectations folks? They have the complete opposite reaction. If they failed, it's because of something they're lacking, because they're stupid or incapable. But if they succeeded, it was because the exam happened to be easy and they shouldn't expect that every time. This can essentially create a self-fulfilling prophecy, a vicious or virtuous cycle, which I talked about in the episode on mindset. Optimism and success are not just related. Success is built on optimism. And the good thing is, because optimism creates a lot of anticipation, it also creates dopamine release and rewards in your brain, which I've talked about a lot in the episode on habits. You can become addicted to optimism in a way, and that's a good thing as long as it does not get to be too extreme in that sort of unicorn rainbow example I gave a little bit earlier. People who use optimism and the optimism bias, who have high expectations, are scientifically proven to be happier. So keep that in mind when you consider your approach to life and projects. Of course, there's a bit of a dark side to optimism bias. Everything has a shadow side, because in this case, it can cause people to make bad decisions and take bigger risks than they would otherwise. For example, they might opt out of annual physicals at the doctor, or text and drive, or feel like it's okay to skip putting money into an emergency fund, being victim to time discounting, not put on sunscreen or pay for health insurance or file for a trademark or have an attorney look over their contracts or actually have people sign contracts. You get the idea. And remember, your clients and customers have all these same tendencies. So how can you provide solutions that will help support the optimism when it's beneficial and downplay that dark shadow side to help them out of it when they get in that space? We'll get into this more next week in the introduction to nudges. Another way the optimism bias shows up in business is when we estimate how long something's going to take. Have you ever bid a project and estimated it would take you, let's say, 40 hours, and it ended up taking 60 or 80 or 150? This is your optimism bias. You estimate you can do things quicker and easier than you're really able to do. You don't account for things like boredom, procrastination, problems that might come up, and just how long it really takes. You think, this time I'll be faster, more efficient, even though all the data says these projects take a long time. For the personal side of this, my husband is notorious for underestimating how long yard work projects will take. I remember he was building a flower bed, maybe last year, and planting all the flowers in it. This project required tearing out grass and dirt and buying a tamper and a special sand and making sure the blocks were level and hauling it all into the backyard with a single wheelbarrow and as an individual person. He told me he thought the project would be done in 4 or 5 hours, to which I said, okay, see you tomorrow. So who do you think was right? You know it was me. What about to-do lists? Have you ever made a list of tasks you'll get done for the day and had it reach insurmountable levels, something the Flash couldn't even get done in a day? Me too. Since I called out my husband here, I need to say I do this all the time. Why? Because it would be really great if I got those things done. I would feel so good. My brain is anticipating the rewards I'm going to get after, and I am uniquely capable of getting through tasks quickly. Today is the day I will get through all 10 items on my to-do list. Or not. This is one of those times you can and should check yourself, to use the verbiage from my social media contributor. When estimating how long a project will take, round up a lot and factor in a contingency. No one likes to make the call saying you're going to go over hours and over budget. And no one likes getting that call. And no one likes eating extra hours that you took and having to resent a project that goes longer than you planned. Set a realistic expectation up front so you can under-deliver on hours, which is over-delivering on their expectation. See what I did there? Same thing on the to-do list. Go with that one thing method I talk about all the time. If you could only do one thing or two things today, what would they be? Here is my biggest tip for you in this episode, which applies to both personal life and career. Are you ready? Now's the time. Really listen. If I lost you, come back. Let optimism bias guide your goals and dreams. If you knew you would not fail, what would you go do right now? What is the leap you would take? The job you would apply for, the media outlet you would pitch, the book you would write, the client you would cold call, the business you would launch, the person you would ask out on a date. Whatever these big goals are, fill them up with as much optimism bias as you can muster, because confidence will get you there. However, you do need to do the work to get the reward. So in your daily tasks on the way to that goal, have some restraint. Set your to-do list with one thing at a time. What's the one thing you can do today to get you to that big goal, which you know will come true eventually if you keep on climbing the mountain? Do something today, do something else tomorrow, and eventually you will get there and you will succeed. This also applies in leading teams. Set corporate goals with optimism bias, but set realistic tasks for your staff. The optimism bias is a combination of strategic naivete and a constant striving for a silver lining. Perhaps you've heard that Thomas Edison tried 1,000 times before he successfully invented the light bulb. A reporter asked him what it felt like to fail 1,000 times, and he said, "I didn't fail 1,000 times. The light bulb was an invention with 1,000 steps." I've also heard this quote as, "I did not fail. I just figured out 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb." Whichever quote you like, the lesson's the same. Edison used optimism bias to set his goal. He knew he would do it because he was uniquely talented. And then he tried and tried and tried and tried until he did. This is the same for the Wright brothers, Tesla, Einstein. Really, any inventor is a great example of optimism bias in action. So, inventors and entrepreneurs are more likely to use optimism bias, but there are others who are more likely to have a natural optimism bias. And that is those people who are attractive. Studies have shown that attractive infants get more attention from their parents. Humans are trusting of people who are attractive, whether we like it or not. In general, attractive people are given the benefit of the doubt when there are squabbles at school or in their careers when they grow up. They are often given more opportunities and supported throughout their lives, which helps them develop more confidence and making it easier for them to wear rose-colored glasses and have a self-fulfilling, virtuous cycle life. Of course, I know that looks aren't everything, and this doesn't explain every single case, but there are some specific examples where positive reinforcement around a person can build confidence, optimism, and success in life above what we would all expect. And I'm going to touch on a couple of those here in a little bit. But before we get to that, if you remember that optimism bias is often the foundation for success, and while it's best to start building optimism bias at a young age, it can be learned and used to your advantage in the way you approach life and business at any time. It'll take a little practice, but if you find that scary thing you've been putting off and decide you're going to go for it as if you can't fail, do what a confident person would do, your brain starts to believe and act as if you're confident, even if you didn't really feel that way. It's pretty cool. You may be wondering how luck plays into all this. How do outside events factor in, and can we create our own luck using the optimism bias? Well, it's serendipitous or lucky that I was working on this episode when someone I'm in a mastermind with, Carrie Clark of Next Level Coaching, recommended the book, Can You Learn to Be Lucky by Carla Starr. There are links for Carrie, Carla, and the book in the show notes. This book was recommended because Carla references a lot of brain studies throughout her book, and Carrie knew it would be right up my alley. I decided to test my optimism bias and ability to be lucky, and I reached out to Carla, and she agreed to answer some of my questions about optimism bias and how it ties in with luck. Want to hear a little bit of our conversation? Great. Here we go. Carla Starr, welcome to the podcast.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for having me.
The chapter in your book that deals most closely with optimism bias is called How Sarah Palin Happened. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I use this idea of Sarah Palin, how Sarah Palin happened. She's an attractive woman, and, people automatically just, as a species, we find attractive faces rewarding. So we tend to kind of lean in, we give attractive people the benefit of the doubt. We grade them on a curve. It's a little nicer to them. We think they're a little more interesting. And so as a result, they end up developing like better social skills, a better sense of self, because if you're used to ending up on top of whatever group it is that you're in, you just develop this sense of like, oh, I can do anything. And I just think she is such a good example. She's never been given a reason to doubt her ability. It's like she wanted to be, Miss Alaska, and she was Miss Congeniality. And then she went to Idaho and she studied journalism, and then she got a job as a sportscaster back in Alaska. And then, she wanted to be the mayor. So she ran as mayor. It's like literally every single thing that she's ever wanted to do is like, you know what? She got it. So when they said, hey, maybe you can be vice president, if you think about it from her point of view, like there's nothing in her history that actually made her say like, no, you can't do that, because every single time that people have supported her, people have believed in her. So why on earth wouldn't she think that she was underqualified to be vice president? So it's like when everybody treats you that well, you end up developing that much stronger sense of self and a sense of what you can accomplish. Right. And so, or another example would be, just imagine Brad Pitt giving guys advice on how to pick up women in bars. From his point of view, it's just kind of like, yeah, you just stand there and smile. Right? Yeah, exactly. I don't know why you're having such a, oh, you're making me so complicated.
Absolutely. When you were just talking and when I was reading through the book, it made me think of, there's that new movie with Amy Schumer, well, new-ish Amy Schumer movie, I Feel Pretty. And showing that you talk in the book about being able to, it's kind of in the fake it till you make it situation. But if you live as if you're a confident person and as if things are going to go well for you, if you use that skewed-ish perspective toward, being optimistic and whatnot, that can help you to be more likely to be lucky. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you just think like, I can do this, I feel good about myself. I mean, that's essentially what it takes, is just that internal motivation. So, what ends up happening is that the way that people get used to being treated by others, it shapes our behavior, shapes our identity or a sense of what we can accomplish. So, people, if they maybe aren't graded well in one area of life when they're young, like I was not the kid who was really picked first in gym class, when I was young. But you know what? I was good in English class. So I ended up thinking like I felt pretty in English class, so I tried a little harder,
Where I actually I was taking AP English in high school. And I had a teacher who told me that basically it said I was a terrible writer. I was never going to be good at writing. And no matter what I did, I came in early, I stayed late. I worked so long on all these papers and I kept being the like C-D. And I have been, 4.0 type student forever. And for whatever, it was just always marked terrible, 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 terrible. And so I dropped the class and went to a regular English class, and they, wow, you're so good. There was A+ on everything. So I don't know if it was the teacher or what it was. And then, to go on and essentially write for a living, sort of I guess.
Right. So this is one of the things I talk about in the book is, can you learn to be lucky? And so much of it just depends on these early formative experiences that we have, because they really can set in stone, like how you view the world and how you see yourself. So, there's one chapter on Find Your Thing, on how in order to achieve the pinnacle of any kind of success, I use Olympic gold medals here as an example. One of those is your early coaches and what they instill in you. And if they say, you know what, if you try really hard, then you can get better. Like that is the most adaptive thing. And unfortunately, it is so easy to have this essentialism belief of or this fixed mindset, right? Either you have it or you don't, and you just don't have it. And I think a lot of times adults or teachers realize how much of an impact those small, subtle comments that they can make on someone in their sense of self for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely. It's very much the everything matters, which I talk about on the podcast a lot. And the thing that you say, it's like the ripple effect where you say a little thing that you don't think is that big of a deal, but it just makes its way to where it's this huge, essentially like a complex that somebody told you that you are tone deaf or that you don't know how to do anything yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So, another perfect example, like I was in, chorus when I was in middle school, and when I was in high school, I was still in chorus. And then I didn't want to devote all this time to choir. So Mr. LaDuca, the music teacher, I don't know what happened, but he just said, oh, your voice isn't good. So as a result, I didn't practice as much. And what happens when you think you can't do something, you don't practice and then you don't get better. So you're just reinforcing this self-defeating mindset.
Right. So you can either go with the vicious cycle or the virtuous cycle. You pick the thing you care about and put your effort in, and to use the optimism bias to your advantage in allowing you to be lucky in life and in business would be pick the area. Because you could do this everywhere, but if it doesn't come naturally to you, if you aren't, the beauty queen that Sarah Palin was, and you're having to, or Brad Pitt, and you have to change your approach a little bit, could say, I'm just going to go full force in this case and take that approach. I know a lot of business advice, people would say, if you could do anything and know that you would succeed, what's the thing that you would do? And if you just have to go through with this expectation, it's going to work. And even if time 1 or 2 or 3 doesn't work, that you're going to get there eventually.
Absolutely. Right. And I think a lot of people, maybe when they're just starting, or, whether they're starting a business or whether they're just starting their career, they look at people who have made it or people who they look up to, maybe they think, oh, everything has just worked out for them. They probably never had to deal with the struggles that I have. So I think that is a huge way that people can kind of talk themselves out of optimism bias or all these life enhancing mindsets, because nobody posts their failures on social media. Nobody puts, this is my, 5th try, or my, I spend many hours in the gym trying to perfect this one skill.
Right.
So people don't realize the people at the top, like they have had to work that much. They've had to work that hard.
The mundaneness, I know that matters. I think you mentioned in the book, there's the guy that was analyzing all the swimmers, the elite. And finding, all the time that goes into, there's the microsecond where you win the gold medal, but it's everything else that matters, and feeling like you can, knowing you're going to make it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So awesome getting to talk to Carla and learn from her experience and her book. Before this interview, Carla told me about her own experience getting her book published. It wasn't a simple path for her. She said she knew she wanted to be a writer as a child, and she wrote 2 really bad novels that she sent to a couple outlets as a young adult with no success. She then decided that she needed to go into nonfiction and had several books she tried to get picked up, was dropped by an agent who stopped believing in the book he encouraged her to write before she got her agent for this book. And that agent told her she didn't have enough bylines under her name, outlets she'd written for, even though she'd been working as a journalist for years. So she went out and wrote more pitches. Many of them garnered no response. But she was able to get picked up and write for The Atlantic, Slate, Popular Science, The Guardian, The Los Angeles Times, and appear on CBS Sunday Morning. Many of those coming from within a few months of the literary agent saying she needed to improve her byline. I don't know about you, but I would say she accomplished her goal. Perhaps it was luck. Perhaps it was optimism bias. Perhaps it was hard work. Perhaps it was all of that. And guess what? I pushed my luck even further and asked Carla to join me on my new Facebook Live series to chat and answer questions you listeners and likers of the Brainy Business Facebook page may have. And you know what? She said yes. Mark this date on your calendar and go to the Facebook page to accept and get a reminder set up. February 13th at 8:30 a.m. Pacific time. That's the Seattle time zone. That is when our Facebook Live is going to start. Carla and I are going to talk about optimism bias, luck, and answer any questions you may have. So come join us by going over to facebook.com/thebrainybiz, B-I-Z, like the page and click that you're going to the event to get the reminder. You can also just use the link in the show notes to take you directly to the Facebook event and again, save that for you. If you're listening to this after the 13th and find yourself thinking, no, how could I be so unlucky? Don't worry. The video will be posted to the Facebook page after the fact, so you can still watch and learn from our conversation. And I'm doing these videos every week. At least that's the plan. So if you do have additional questions, you can always come join me for an upcoming episode of that on the Facebook page. Again, I don't know about you. I'm super excited and I look forward to seeing you in that live chat with Carla and I on February 13th. So we've talked about what the optimism bias is, how it impacts you personally, which gives you a clue into how it impacts your customers and peers, how it can be a great thing and its shadow side, as well as how optimism bias ties in with luck and success. The last thing I want to touch on is the two ways this applies to businesses. At the end of the day, optimism bias has a light and a dark side, which you've already heard me say, and your business falls on one side or the other. It's important to know which side you're on when you're creating messaging to your clients and customers. Let me show you what I mean. The light side of optimism bias is any aspirational product out there. This goes for the gym memberships, weight loss products, health coaches, or really coaches of any kind, timeshares, courses, workshops, conferences, how-to books, DIYers, anything that's helping someone to do better and relying on their own optimism bias to think they will be better than everyone else or their past experience and that this time they will make it. Marketing to their optimism and aspiration is good in this case. You want to help motivate them, and you also have a responsibility to help them set those aspirational goals with realistic day-to-day tasks so they can actually achieve what your product or service promises, which becomes a real win-win-win for everybody because you get more success stories. All is great there. So what about the dark side? The dark side of optimism bias includes businesses that sell insurance, doctors, nonprofits trying to cure illnesses, dentists, people trying to get outsiders to vote for their causes. These entities tend to lean on statistics, like the 1 in 3 people getting cancer, but that messaging does not work. It triggers optimism bias and has actually been shown to have a reverse effect. So if someone who smokes knows smoking is bad and they want to quit, then they see an ad saying 1 in 4 smokers are at risk of getting lung cancer. Their optimism bias is actually triggered and they become less likely to make a change. These types of businesses need to understand optimism bias and how it impacts their customers because you're likely driving people away. One way to combat this is with the availability bias, which is the topic of episode 15 and linked in the show notes. As I highlighted in that episode, when is someone most likely to get flood insurance? That's right. After a flood, right when they don't need it. And people are more likely to be checked for cancer when someone close to them was recently diagnosed. When the concern becomes real, when the optimism bias is shattered, even for a few minutes or days, that is the time to get your message out if you're one of these businesses. That means you need to prepare your messaging in advance and be ready to communicate at a moment's notice, which is something I help my clients with. And you can email me at melina@thebrainybusiness.com if you want some more information on that. So for your business, consider which side are you on, light or dark? And how can you make sure optimism bias works for you instead of against you? Hopefully this episode has helped. And don't forget, there's a free worksheet for you at thebrainybusiness.com/34 to help you use optimism bias to your advantage in life and business. And remember the biggest takeaway: be as optimistic as you can in big goals and help your clients and those around you to do the same. But assume you're overestimating your ability to complete the day-to-day tasks. And with that recipe, you will be able to manufacture your own luck. So, what got your brain buzzing as you learned about optimism bias today? For me, it's always powerful to remember just how much this bias influences the biggest decisions we make, from choosing a life partner to launching a business. It's a natural part of how our brains work, helping us dream big and keep going in the face of setbacks. But without some healthy checks, optimism bias can lead to risky decisions, unrealistic expectations, and plans that fall apart down the road. This is something I talk about in my TEDx talk, There's Nothing Magical About Monday, how optimism bias leads us to think our future selves will be more productive, more motivated, and somehow magically different than we are today. It's such a common trap and one we all fall into. But when we recognize it, we can use thoughtful decision-making to start to make small, meaningful changes that stick. There's a link to watch the talk in the show notes so you can check it out and go deeper into this opportunity to get more of the right things done. And of course, you can just search for it on YouTube. There's Nothing Magical About Monday. And speaking of thoughtful decisions, be sure to join me next time for episode 507, where I'm going to be talking with Abby Davison about her book, Money and Love. She shares a practical, science-backed framework to help you make better decisions when your heart and your wallet are both on the line. In the meantime, where have you seen optimism bias pop up in your own life lately? Come share it with me on social media. You'll find me as the Brainy Biz pretty much everywhere and as Melina Palmer on LinkedIn. There are links in the show notes to make it easy, as well as for my top related past episodes, books, ways to get in touch, and more. It's all waiting for you in the app you're listening to and at thebrainybusiness.com/506. And just like that, episode 506 on optimism bias is done. Join me Friday for a brand new episode with Abby Davison to discuss her book, Money and Love. It's going to be a lot of fun. You don't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Melina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.